Hello and welcome to Business Today. I'm Siddharth Zarabi, and with me here at the World Economic Forum at our studios at Davos is Cleene, the head of the Food Systems Initiative at the World Economic Forum. Sean, welcome to Business Today. This is a time of headlines around the food crisis, and that comes around an energy crisis. And we are perhaps living in a world where new unpredictable elements are being introduced pretty much every day. For the viewer, especially in India, how would you describe this food security crisis? Is it just fears or is it real and having an impact on the ground?
So, I think we are in a food crisis now. And, already during COVID, the food system was stretched to the maximum. Last year, we saw 200 million people. This is already a doubling of people who are in acute food hunger, so on the verge of starvation. And we were already seeing significant rising prices during COVID. But then the conflict in the Ukraine has exacerbated that even further. So we could see hunger go to unprecedented levels this coming year, with maybe 400 million people around the world in acute food shortages, and with prices potentially even going further.
Sean, break it down, because you've given us 2-3 points. First, is it a production crisis or is it a supply crisis or a mix of both?
So it's a mix of both. Mm-hmm. So I think because of inflation, because of what was going on in COVID, and then just rising inflation generally, what initially we were seeing was rising food prices. Now what we're starting to see is an availability shortage, which is a supply and demand issue. It's trying to get the right food. We often around the world have enough food. It's just not in the right places.
It's not in the right places. For our viewers in India, and a country where we produce massive amounts of food grain, of sugar, and you know the numbers for India, many of our viewers would perhaps be wondering whether this has to do with the way globalization has led to trans-border food availability and exports. Why I ask you this, Sean, and you'll perhaps appreciate the question. This is a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, Russia being the aggressor here. The rest of the world doesn't have war of a similar kind happening. Yet why is food supply being disrupted potentially to the rest of Europe or even Africa? Why is that happening? Is it because our global food chains are interlinked and they are broken at this point of time?
So it's two issues. One is the system was very interlinked. And when you have a series of acute shocks, with a COVID-related shock, with a series of weather-related shocks in India, you're having unprecedented heat waves, over 50 degrees, which is also impacting on the crops. And then you have a conflict as well, and they all come together. Then it creates a tension. But the other issue is that we are also in the middle of a climate crisis. And so this is also having a huge impact on food systems. Be under no illusions. This is not just about producing as much food as cheaply as possible and moving it around the world. This is, can we produce food in a way that's healthier for people, that puts less demands on the planet? At the moment, 30% of greenhouse gases come from the food and land use system. More than 2/3 of biodiversity loss is as a result of food system transformation, and then it's having big impacts on health as well. So we have to bring all of that together. So that makes it complicated.
Before we get into what needs to be done, I just want to also ask you about the current immediate situation. By when do you think, if at all, this situation will ease? The backdrop to this question is that while globalization led to sort of global supplies and integration of supply chains in food as well, some amount of deglobalization and economic fragmentation that is happening is also leading to certain countries, including India, which has put export restrictions on wheat and now on sugar, to first protect their domestic consumers, protect their domestic food security. Is that also going to continue and therefore keep this crisis alive for an extended period of time?
Potentially. I think the fact that this is having a big impact on fertilizer prices right now, we've seen fertilizer prices double in during COVID and go up even 30% since the beginning of the year. That will have an impact on production in the coming season and probably the season after that.
And for fertilizers, the increase in prices of gas is contributing to further...
Fertilizer prices are directly linked to the gas price. But at the same time, as you said, then countries are reacting differently. And I think we've been discussing this a lot at Davos this week. And there is a challenge there. If last time we had a food crisis in 2007, 2008, we saw a number of countries impose ad hoc bans. And they may have had a short-term benefit, but they actually caused significant long-term disruptions into the food system. And so what we actually need to do is be much smarter about how we are focusing in on support or making interventions at a point of crisis. And so that means we need more data, more transparent data to make informed decisions so that the real impact particularly on those most vulnerable, because this will have a catastrophic impact, can be actually targeted so it's not doing blanket bans, it's providing targeted support to those populations around the world that actually need it most and using data in a much smarter way.
We're at day 5 of the forum. In the past 4-5 days, I'm sure you've been discussing this as you lead the food systems initiative here. What are the key solutions, the newer innovative ideas that you think have come up, which countries and governments across the world and perhaps even private corporations need to quickly adapt to?
So I think the use of transparent and inclusive digital and data is key. As the forum, we've been building a large, on the back of the UN Food Systems Summit last year, a digital and data alliance together with the World Bank, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and CGIAR, the global network of agriculture research institutes, to look at how we can actually create much more open, shared, transparent data. But also in the context of a crisis like this, there are other innovations that we could focus on. At the moment, we lose or waste 30% of food. We probably wouldn't have people starving if we were able to use all of that food today. And that food itself contributes up to 6 to 8% of greenhouse gases. So if we could be much more intelligent as to how we think about food and loss, and then I think in terms of using climate smart technology, if you have a small field, if you're a small farmer in many parts of the world, it's not about trying to produce more and more and more on that field. It's trying to produce a smarter and be rewarded for actually using the land that you've got in a smarter, more regenerative, more climate smart way. And so building those economic imperatives into the system so farmers are actually being rewarded for those practices.
Sean, on a related note, have you had occasion to delve into what has happened in Sri Lanka with regard to their food security? They made a sudden switch, according to experts, to organic farming, and their yields have dropped drastically, and that's contributing to a very significant socio-economic and also political crisis in that island nation. And the reason, therefore, the point that I really want to ask you is, does Sri Lanka hold an example of how you should not suddenly switch gears, and even if you have to transit towards more responsible farming, it should be done in a very careful manner?
I think the way you ask the question is actually the answer, in the sense that we're about to go through a significant food systems transformation. We went through a digital transformation over many years. We've now, for the last decade, been in an energy transformation. I think we're just starting to enter into a significant and large food system transformation. If we make sudden and large knee-jerk reactions one way or the other, this will be detrimental to the system. And I think what we now need to do is say, okay, it's going to take 3 or 4 years maybe to change the way in which agricultural practices are done. How do we bridge that so that the farmer doesn't carry the whole cost burden? How do we build incentives in from government and change the way in which incentives are done so farmers are being rewarded for these changed practices? How do we change market demand in a way that consumers are incentivized for buying those products that will actually make the food system better overall? But we shouldn't, this is a transformation. It's not just turning on a switch and changing systems overnight.
A broader question, Sean, the global trade order, the World Trade Organization, and it hasn't really delivered, in my own personal view, on some of the points that had been discussed with regard to agriculture, with the farm sector. And now we see that the WTO isn't really moving ahead, and countries are choosing bilateral as well as multilateral groupings for various different reasons. From that perspective, because I believe that capitalism and a new world trade order actually helped in delivering global food surpluses. Ideologies cannot do that. Do you think there's a broader trade policy aspect also with regard to food security, because we haven't seen enough progress on tariff elimination, for example, or much fairer access for products from developing countries like India into Europe or US when it comes to farm products?
I think we're going to have to look at that whole basket of incentives. We need to think, are we incentivizing the right things?
Okay.
That will get us to where we need to be, say, in the next 10 years. And are we paying and costing in the right things for food? At the moment, what we pay for in the supermarket is actually costing society maybe 2 or 3 times more than that. And so as we move food around the world, are we actually rewarding those countries who are adopting regenerative practices and then selling those goods competitively in different parts of the world? Are we starting to look at what are the implications of using less water, using less inputs? Are countries being rewarded for much better climate smart practices? So I think we need to work, organizations like the WTO and other organizations need to look at how we incentivize the system to change. And that won't be done by one player alone.
Absolutely. It's everybody needs to act together. My final question, the current crisis, a temporary setback, and hopefully once this blows over, we will move towards the longer medium-term goals that we had in mind.
That's the challenge. As we're in a crisis when it's having a catastrophic impact on the poor, at the same time, we have to really keep our eye on the prize here, which is, and really look at the future. And actually food and agriculture is one of the areas that can most buy us time, not just by reducing greenhouse gas impact, but actually drawing down carbon into the soil by increasing organic content into the soil. If we did that at a global level, this is what we've been discussing at the forum, and we have initiatives through the forum where we're looking at transforming that through 100 million farmers, that the soil becomes an asset. And we start to really draw down carbon, and we turn that into a value that can be returned to the farmers. I mean, if we can do that at the same time and use this crisis as an opportunity, not just see it as a crisis, then we have a real chance to turn this around.
Absolutely. And that chance is very significant because remember, food security is at the bedrock of the security of our entire globe. Sean, thank you very much for your time and sharing those thoughts with us, especially for viewers from India, which, as you know, has one of the largest populations in farming and a population that is depending on the farming output in that country. Thank you very much for your time with us today. Mm-hmm. And that's a wrap on this conversation. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.